Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 15th installment of Chaos Under Heaven. I am your host, fellow traveler, and today we are going to talk about current events, sort of. It's more just YouTube drama, but I figure it's something that's worth covering. This stream isn't just going to be about Vaush, although his name is in the title. It's more about really just clearing up certain confusions and misconceptions about certain historical events that took place in the USSR. And with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. Okay. Cool-a-rooney. What's up, guys? Hopefully my connection doesn't drop. The reason why the stream was delayed was because I rolled out of bed pretty late, and I had to go to the store in order to get a Ethernet cable. That way I would be able to have better connection, and I wouldn't have to worry about the stream constantly dropping, because this has been like a perpetual issue. And I also went to get a new webcam. This piece of shit. I plugged it in, and it was blurrier than a bitch, so I decided to roll with the original webcam. What are you gonna do? So, gotta return that fucker. Anyways, another announcement. I'm starting up a Patreon. I was setting it up right before the stream started, and after the stream's over, I'm gonna finish setting it up. And I'm going to have my tiers and the different donations levels and so on, like, ready and prepared. So, yeah, you can check the description below. There will be a Patreon for this channel. And if you guys would like to see me upload more content more frequently and often, I highly recommend you pledge between $2 to $5 a month, because for every, like, $15 per month that I earn, that is roughly an hour that's freed up from my job that I can dedicate to making YouTube videos. So if I'm making, say, $500 to $1,000 a month, that is a lot less overtime that I have to commit to in order to make my video essays, in order to do the live streams, in order to do research. I can commit more of my time to being an effective propagandist and less of my time to being a package handler for FedEx. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, let me know. You know, check the description below after this live stream is, well, finished and uploaded. I'll have it for you guys at a later date. But anyways, enough of announcements. Let's go ahead and get into the thick of it. But first, coffee. I love my coffee, and I'm going to need that coffee for this video. So what I did was I took a compilation of clips from some of Vaush's live streams, and I've abbreviated them, and I took roughly 6 hours of stream footage and I compressed it down to about a half hour, to where we're just addressing the meat and potatoes of his live streams and some of his arguments that I'd like to address. Now, believe it or not, when it comes to anti-communism, Vaush is not the worst YouTuber. He's actually a lot better in some regards, but he still parrots a lot of the liberal tropes about, like, you know, just life was just shit in the Soviet Union, and, you know, Stalin was just this omnipotent dictator that was in absolute control of absolute everything, and the evil empire, yada yada. A lot of the silly bullshit and falsehoods that I'd like to address. And so the two videos that I took this from is his Tanky stream and his debate with Simmons, or Leftism Today. Now, me and Simmons aren't exactly on speaking terms anymore, but I do think that he did a decent job debating Vaush. I don't know. We'll get into it. Let me go ahead and open you up. Here we go. So yeah, like I said, I got a compilation of clips here. I got my prep document ready. Okay, cool. Got my notes. Let us go ahead and screen share. All right. All right, comrades, let's do this. Turn up the volume a bit.
Dan, what I'd ask you to do is revoke your fucking anti-tanky take because it is alienating to Marxist-Leninism and it makes it more difficult to organize and therefore is counter-revolutionary.
Listen, hey, my friends, hey, listen, MLs. Hey, MLs, are you a fan of Marxism? Are you a fan of Leninism? Do you like capital? Do you like fucking state and revolution? Are you a fan of the Vanguard Party? Hey, isn't it fucked up that Lenin didn't want Stalin to be in power and deliberately wrote that he not be put in power, but Stalin, the strongman brute, killed his way into power and led the USSR down a despotic, brutally anti-socialist reign for the next few decades? Isn't it fucked up how people glamorize that legacy, not of Lenin's? Isn't it fucked up how the USSR ended up being a failed experiment in large part due to Stalin's reactionary politics? Isn't it fucked up that people celebrate that legacy and now you, MLs, are being confused constantly with people who are only in it for the authoritarianism, for the leather boots, and for the fancy jackets with the medals pinned on the front? Isn't that fucked up? Join me, MLs. Be here in my community so I can protect you from those fucking grifters, from those fucking shitlords, all right? We can be safe together and purge the tanky menace from our community.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack here. Where I don't even know where to begin. I guess we'll start with this notion that Lenin's testament, where he wanted Stalin pulled. So, just to give you guys a heads up, Stalin did not kill his way to power. He was put in power by the Central Committee of the Communist Party, and he was appointed General Secretary of the party by Vladimir Lenin, you know? And, you know what, here, I'll just let Kotkin explain. I have a clip from Stephen Kotkin, who is a radical leftist historian. Totally biased in our favor, right, guys? If you guys know who Stephen Kotkin is. And I'll go ahead and run. Yeah, we'll do the entire screen. Fuck it. And I believe it's right here.
General Secretary position. And this is what we propose. And Stalin says, there's what? There's a letter from Lenin? Now let's backtrack a tiny bit here. Let's talk about Lenin and Gorky at the estate. We have the doctor's journals reporting his activities, or actually his inactivities, his inability to write, his inability to speak, his massive headaches, just a debilitated situation. We have other documents at the time testifying also to Lenin's difficulties. But now somehow we have dictation coming from him, calling for Stalin's removal. It's very suspicious. We don't know in the end if Lenin dictated these documents or not. We don't know if his wife interpolated his thoughts.
Nobody's looked at it more closely than you.
Well, there is no document. This is the problem. You go to the archives in Moscow and you say, can I read the testament of Lenin? And you'll get a typescript. Now, in all other matters of dictation, there's a stenographic handwritten document. Right. Because if somebody's speaking and you're the secretary, you're writing down not every word, but abbreviations, initials, and then you go back to your office, you go back to the typewriter and you type it up, and then you show it to the boss and the boss initials it, even if the boss can only initial it left-handed because his right hand is parallel. But we don't have a document. There is no original stenographic account of Lenin's quote dictation. Now, there are other documents around this time that are Lenin's dictation with the handwritten stenographic version. This one, no. All we've got is a typescript. Moreover, the content of the typescript is changing over time. There's going to be a different version in 1923 compared to 1922. There's going to be a different version later in 1923. There's going to be a different version published in 1927. It first becomes Lenin's testament when it's circulated underground by the Trotskyites, who get called to account for circulating the document, which they've affixed the title Lenin's Testament to. And there's a hearing. Felix Dzerzhinsky, the head of the secret police, which says you're not allowed to circulate this document. And that's another version of the document that we have, the Trotskyite one that circulated. So we don't have the original. We have suspicious circumstances of its emergence. We have the convenient fact for Trotsky, Zinoviev, Kamenev, and Krupskaya that it calls for Stalin's removal. But once again, Zinoviev has not enacted the removal. He's concocted a different version, implanted himself next to Stalin in the Secretariat. Now, think about this, Peter. If Stalin was a maniac, if he was a sociopath, if he was dangerous and a murderer, and you had a document from Lenin calling for his removal, just for self-preservation, you would say, let's get this done. Let's remove this guy. Let alone what your personal ambition might be to replace him. You want to save the revolution. You want to save yourself physically. Zinoviev writes to Kamenev, who's back in Moscow, working with Stalin, while Zinoviev is in this resort, this mineral water town, Kislovodsk. And Kamenev says, now this is a guy, Kamenev, who's known Stalin for 20 years at this point. since 1903. We're in the spring, summer of 1923. He's known him for 20 years. And Kamenev is the guy who gave Stalin the copy of Machiavelli's The Prince in Russian translation. So he's not a naive person. You can't call Kamenev naive. Kamenev says, it's not a problem. We don't have to remove Stalin. We don't have to put anybody else in the Secretariat. Kamenev nixes the Zinoviev idea, which is a reaction to the Lenin document.
All right, I think that's enough of that. So, in summary, Stalin's rise to power was absolutely 100% legitimate. Trotsky and his clique circulated a document that was most likely fraudulent in order to get Stalin pulled from power. They were promptly ousted out of the country, and, well, the rest is history. Now, for this notion that, like, you can be a fan of Marxism-Leninism, but, you know, you can't be pro-Stalin, I don't think he understands what a Marxist-Leninist is. There are quote-unquote MLs that are anti-Soviet, anti-Stalin. They're called leftcoms. They're called Trotskyists, all right? These are the people that believe that the Soviet Union was not like the legitimate implementation and interpretation of Marx's vision, all right? We, on the other hand, believe that it was. And not only that, but like another thing that he loses the plot on is the fact that Stalin is the one who synthesized Marxism-Leninism. He is the one who, he wrote Foundations of Leninism. I got a copy of it on my shelf over there. And yeah, it's like an introductory pamphlet, and he wrote it. And Marxism-Leninism is what is considered the political ideology of the Soviet Union at the time. So Vaush doesn't really get what a Marxist-Leninist is, but based on his definition of what a Marxist-Leninist is, which is one who upholds Stalin in the USSR, that by definition makes literally all MLs tankies. Like, so when he tries to differentiate later between Marxist-Leninists and tankies, really, it's kind of like, it's not really like genuine, I should say. Like, he doesn't really understand what an ML is or what it's about, is what it appears to be. So really, we're all tankies. If you uphold Stalin, if you uphold the USSR, you're just this authoritarian that's only in it for the aesthetics and, I mean, yada yada. I mean, don't get me wrong, I think there's some people that kind of do go overboard explaining away all of the wrongdoings and shortcomings of the Soviet Union. Without a doubt, this is a thing, and it is the case. However, many of us try to remain objective in our analysis, and many of us acknowledge that there's a reason to lie and like bullshit about the Soviet Union. And it's really only in the West you're going to see like interpretations of history like this, or because like Stalin and Lenin are like universally beloved characters, like historical figures across like Eastern Europe and in Russia and in like India and China. If you ask like most people, more specifically communists from the East, most of them have positive thoughts of Lenin, Stalin, and Mao, you know. And there isn't an accident for that, because they were great leaders and they're not the monsters that fucking Western historians make them out to be. But anyways, I think we've had enough of that. Okay, cool.
So I'm going to drop the hot take. All right. It's like, I'm going to say that that is an utterly unsympathetic and unmaterialist analysis of like how Stalin came about in the Soviet Union. It wasn't a situation where the workers built this magnificent worker state, and then some horrible cunt came along and ruined it for everyone. You know, like Stalin, what's this quote by Marx? It's like, men make history, but not through circumstances of their own choosing. You know, Stalin was a product of material circumstances.
This is not, yeah, so are slave owners. What kind of defense is that? What? So are
no, I'm not defending Stalin.
You just defended Stalin.
I didn't. I explained it using a materialist analysis.
Yeah, no, you didn't do a materialist analysis. You didn't using great man theory, and then by defending him by saying that, hey, well, you know, people were fucked up back then. Okay.
No, that's not my point. That's a misrepresentation of what I'm trying to say. So it's like when I look at something like the Soviet Union, I look at the, you know, the early days of it when it's all coming together, fantastic, everyone's having a great time, right? But then the material circumstances force it to fucking collapse internally under its own contradictions. So for me, the important way that you analyze it, you look, is like, why the fuck is this happening? Like, you don't just pin that shit on Stalin.
Okay, so for those of you who don't know, Vaush is debating a non-Leninist. He's debating this Trotskyist. This guy's a trot. He considers like the Soviet Union a deranged or degenerate worker state, but I mean he's got some very good analysis. I don't necessarily have anything against Trots. I just think we have some different interpretations of historical events. I've worked with people in socialist alternative. There's some good people. We just disagree on some shit. But otherwise, you know, we're willing to let the past be the past and be friends. But yeah, no, this guy's definitely a trot. And Vaush is doing some, I don't know, I'll explain it here in a second. Let me play his response.
I didn't hit it all on Stalin. I was obviously being a little bit dramatic when I did my call to MLs, but you did unironically just defend Stalin by saying,
I'm
people were like that.
I'm saying he's a pot, like, in that time and place of most likely be a Trotsky like it was in the whatever that time. And you know, I'm in favor of Trotsky's like permanent revolution, blah blah blah. Like I see a theoretical solution to like a material problem that Stalin didn't implement or whatever.
What material solution did he bring? He was reactionary. He rolled back a lot of the reform. He fucking jailed gays. He like was a brutal dictator who slaughtered his way through the fucking bureaucracy, who killed people who opposed him, who would jail journalists, who would send political dissenters to fucking Siberia, who would engage in reactionary, counter-revolutionary, like imperialist oppression of the Soviet like satellite states.
Fucking Stalin wasn't even alive for that, the so-called social imperialism of the Eastern Bloc. What the fuck are you talking about? As for the rolling back of gay rights, I mean, no, this is something that we MLs criticize Stalin for. Like, nobody approves of the rolling back of gay rights in the Soviet Union. I mean, Lenin never really emancipated the gays officially. He just repealed the laws that made it illegal to be homosexual. Stalin just brought them back. So yeah, no, we denounce Stalin for his homophobia, but the thing is that he grew up in a context and time when most of the world saw homosexuality as a mental illness. So there's nothing uniquely evil about Stalin in this respect. I believe in Britain you could be chemically castrated for being gay during the 1930s or 1940s, and in America you were a social pariah if you were ousted as a homosexual. Shit, you were a social pariah all the way up to what, till the 80s and 90s when you know, the LGBT movement really exploded. So this you know, there's kind of like this moralizing fallacy, this fucking whining and bitching about like, oh, well, they were socially conservative. Marx was anti-Semitic. Marx was racist. I'm like, okay, so was everybody. Does that, like, discredit his work? I mean, say what you will about Stalin, but the motherfucker made a hell of an omelet.
What?
Scumbag, yeah.
Yeah, so why are you like, well, don't blame it on him. He was a product of his time. Like,
he was. Like, you have to understand that, like, the conditions laid before the Soviets called for a very strong figure like Stalin. Like, if it wasn't Stalin, let's say Lenin never dies. Lenin doesn't have a stroke and he lives into his 80s. He rules the Soviet Union for the next 30 years. Guarantee you guys that the outcomes that occurred would be very similar to that if Stalin were in charge. Or how about Trotsky? I don't know why, like, Western leftists fillet the fuck out of Trotsky like he was some champion of the movement who was, you know, thrown under the bus. You know, really, Trotsky, the fucking butcher of Kronstadt? Trotsky would have had a very aggressive foreign policy. He wanted to continue war communism. He would have been just as bad, if not worse, than Stalin, at least when it comes to political repression and the purges. So, like, I'm fully convinced he probably would have fucking initiated World War II. So this notion that Trotsky is somehow like a better alternative, or Stalin is like uniquely evil, is really dumb, considering fucking Churchill was starving millions of Indians to death in Bengal, India, or fucking, you know, Hitler instigating World War II or the Holocaust, the fucked up experimentation that was going on in Japan during World War II, or Japanese imperialism under the shogun, or how about FDR? Everyone loves FDR, who completely destroyed the communist movement and rounded up all of the fucking Japanese and put them in concentration camps. Like, so to act like Stalin is just like this uniquely evil historical figure is just ridiculous. There are people in the world that are much bigger ghouls than Stalin who were alive at the time.
It's not about attributing blame, right? It's about having like what's the word, like almost a disembodied analysis of why that happened, so that we can make sure that it doesn't happen again. Is that reasonable?
Sure,
like,
but
you're a materialist.
I am a materialist. Tankies do not support engaging in a critical materialist analysis of Stalin's rise to power. So
to be honest, most people fucking don't. Like, most people on the left are incapable of that. So, and that's not really
Tankies do the opposite. Tankies defend Stalin and then try to promote the kinds of political systems that would lead to people like Stalin taking power again.
Not necessarily. MLs were, it's kind of funny how he talks about the bureaucracy and the centralization of power and authority in the Soviet Union. But the reason why that's interesting to me is because, ironically enough, Stalin would actually agree with Vaush that it was too centralized and not democratic enough. Stalin railed against the bureaucracy in many of his memoirs, and same with Khrushchev. Khrushchev railed against the bureaucracy as well. And you know, during the purges, there was a lot of emphasis on freedom of criticism and like populist terror from below. And we'll get more into the purges later, but should have lost my train of thought. Nah, it's just whining. He's just whining. So it'll be okay, Vaush.
Yeah, sure. Well, yeah, that's a problem.
Okay, so this is like the next stream that I sampled. This is from his debate with leftism today. There's some stuff he said here that I'd like to address. But oh yeah, now I remember what I wanted to say. So back on that point, a lot of the aspects of the Soviet political apparatus weren't that bad. My biggest complaint about it is that it was too bureaucratized and it wasn't democratic enough. Like, one of my biggest criticisms is, like, you don't vote for the guy who's at the top of the pyramid. You vote for the guy who votes for the guy who votes for the guy who votes for the guy at the very top of the pyramid. And I think that sort of like that type of democracy, while better than ours because at least everybody in the pyramid is a part of the same class background as you, there was a ton of social mobility in the USSR, and the bureaucrats, for all it's worth, did have the proletarian interest at heart, you know, despite the bureaucracy's failings and shortcomings. Most MLs today are in favor of actually a system akin to very radical democracy, because hopefully the siege model won't really be necessary, but a lot of them promote the siege model because it's the psychology that we have enemies outside trying to destroy us. So lockstep uniformity and the centralization of power and authority are tragically necessary evils. So anyways, let's go ahead and move on to this stream.
Markets, right? Like, markets are still pretty imperfect. But there were a lot of imperfections with centrally planned economies as well.
Okay, so did you guys just hear what he said about markets? So the reason why we socialists oppose markets is because of the critiques laid out by Karl Marx in Das Kapital. Let's see, you have business cycles where you have periodic sects of the population who have their livelihoods ruined while others get wealthier and take advantage of the crash. You have, you know, unemployment. You have the perpetual need by big business to continue to externalize the costs of their operations more and more. Most big corporations don't really even net pay taxes anymore. They actually receive money from the government, our tax dollars. And not only that, but you have like, reserve labor pools, growing income inequality. Markets generate a great deal of inefficiency and waste. And the whole point of going beyond markets to a planned economy is to actually like directly address the needs of the people rather than leaving it up to the whims of the anarchy of the markets. And Vaush would know this if he were a socialist.
There are many issues with like market economies that I'm willing to like acknowledge and take a look at. But one thing that bothers me is that people who advocate for like centrally planned economies completely ignore the massive historical problems that we've had with said economies, which really bugs me. I think I'm an anarcho-syndicalist long term. I do believe there are ways that markets can serve the public good. I want most things decommodified. Maybe luxury goods can stay with the market issue. But
coming from a market socialist,
yeah, I do believe that pretty firmly. I agree there are problems with markets though.
Yeah. I think historically, actually, the historical examples, you know, we can look at. I'm sure you're familiar with Project Cybernetic in Chile.
I've heard rumors, but if you could fill me in, I would appreciate that.
Yeah. So, sorry, I'm having a cigarette. So, in Chile, basically there was a giant workers trucker strike, and I have a citation here. Even though 10 to 30% of trucks were in operation, Chile was still able to deliver 50 to 70% of the normal supply and deliver 95% of the normally delivered raw materials to key sectors of the economy. So what they did is they said, okay, rather than let the market dictate where resources will go, let's rationally plan the economy so that we can get raw materials. And that's what the Soviet Union did as well. Is they said, well, should we have the market be, you know, determining our entire society? Well, no, because the market would just move towards consumer goods instead of industry because that's what's most profitable. So
the issue I have with that, though, is the only reason your aforementioned example with Chile works is because there were previous market forces that were able to help the government determine the proper allocation of resources.
Market forces and markets are not the same thing. I mean, all they did was take inputs from, okay, so this given industry needs this. We need to make sure it gets here in a timely manner and that. And what they did was they created, well, they created a cybernetic system that was basically able to manage inputs and output tables in real time and basically utilizing control systems and feedback. So control systems and I'm trying to remember the name of the field, but yeah, control systems type engineering is the sort of stuff like that is the kind of tech that's used for this sort of thing. And I mean, we're advanced enough, like we have the information technology necessary to plan an economy in a much more streamlined manner than the archaic methods of the Soviet Union. Like, we aren't going to recreate the USSR. Like,
So the issue isn't like, can the state centrally plan the distribution of this, this, and this, that, that, and that? That's easy. You just have to have the roads, the trucks, and the drivers. But it's constantly responding to an ever-shifting set of conditions as to what the people are interested in, what they need at any given time. That's something that centrally planned economies struggle with. It seems like that instance you gave me was that one in which they had to only temporarily take over an otherwise like market planned route. And I can understand how they would be able to do that. But there were shortages and central planning problems all the time in economies that like attempted central planning. And in all these economies, from Vietnam to the USSR, black markets developed for people to try to compensate for the deficiencies in those markets by buying and selling stuff, often illegally, or bartering usually, to try and fill in those gaps,
Okay, so this sort of sounds like the economic calculation problem, which is something that we've heard from market advocates for decades, and every time we refute it, they create a new version of the same argument. But the reason why the Soviets and these other centrally planned economies experienced shortages was partially because there was a disconnect between like the bureaucracy and the planning apparatus and like people's consumer preferences and choices. And there's not really a lot to do about this when you have millions of consumer goods that you need to plan for. You would have to do like a lot of complex algorithmic equations in order to properly plan an economy like the one we have today. And but with, like, here's an example of one issue that I'm talking about, but the Soviet Union didn't even have barcodes, so they couldn't even track, like, where consumer goods ended up after a certain point. So embezzlement could be an issue. You could have a truck that never comes on time, or deliveries where certain things aren't made, and that's part of the reason why there was error and disconnect, is like their inability to track packages, their inability to account for the shifting changes in demand and so on. But with modern day cybernetics and control systems and IT, you could do that in real time and get clean, smooth economic calculation. In fact, I have an excerpt from Paul Cockshot's book, Towards a New Socialism, that I'd like to read off to you guys. Hold on. There you are. Awesome, awesome. I believe it's page 47 to 51. All right, cool. Here we go. All right, great. Okay, so the problem of scale. In his book, Economics of Feasible Socialism, Eleknov emphasized the importance of the sheer scale of modern economics. He said the Soviet economy included some 12 million distinct types of product, and quoted the estimated Antonov, that to draw up a complete balance plan for that Ukraine would take the labor of the whole world's population over a 10 million years period. The same argument may apply to computing labor values. It is one thing to solve the equations for our toy example of an input-output table. It would be a different thing to solve a system of 12 million simultaneous equations. But it's not enough to say that calculating labor values for a large economy is complex. We have to know how complex it is. And what he does is he shows you some equations down here. Okay, the idea of complexity. Complexity theory deals with the number of discrete steps that are required to perform a calculation. These discrete steps correspond roughly to the number of instructions that would yada yada. You are given a deck of 99 cards. Okay, so this is an example, all right? You're given a deck of 99 cards. Each card has a number between 1 and 99 printed on it. The cards are an arbitrary number. You have to sort them in an ascending order. How do you proceed? One solution is compare the first card to the deck with the second. If the first has the higher number than the second, swap them around, repeat step one. And he goes through to show a better solution where you basically use the exponential multiplier. We have 99 cards in the wrong position to start with, so we need 99 passes through the deck. This involves 98 to 98 comparisons. If we had 50 cards, it would take 49 to 50 steps. The number of operations in the worst case will be about n squared, where n is the number of cards. So the better solution is divide the deck into 10 stacks, form a new deck by putting these stacks behind one another, stating 0 to 10. So you break it up, and then you organize it. And where he's going with this is he's basically talking about the concept of high-tech planning and how you could distribute the planning apparatus through a network of computers. So you wouldn't even need a supercomputer to do this. You would just need like the modern-day computer network that is available today in the United States. Let me go ahead and get to the summary because I don't want to spend the whole stream on this. Using this distributed calculation system, each unit of production would have available, if not up to date, to the minute, then up to the hour estimates of current social labor cost of production alternatives. This is a much faster than a capitalist market can achieve. So using modern computation and these, complex algorithms that I don't want to get too far into, we can actually plan and do hard economic calculation better than the markets. We can do it better, more accurately, because we have the information technology that was not available to the Soviets. Anyways.
Which seems to me like a pretty huge market failure, or centrally planning failure.
yeah, I would agree. And they already had that, so it's the same thing with Chile. Like they already had a market basis to go on, and I don't really see how that would really be an issue. I mean, no matter what, a centrally planned economy is going to come out of a market system, but they weren't relying on a market system. They were relying on teleprompters to essentially calculate, what would need to be produced and where it would go.
Yeah, I mean, I would need to familiarize myself more with those specific examples before I could think of counter arguments. My main issue is it just seems like if we're talking about very basic goods like food, healthcare, water, all that stuff, it seems like these are very easy things for the state to plan out. And I support the decommodification of these industries. Though as an anarchist, I don't exactly support the state. Marx was himself not a statist.
Just completely dismantling Russia. And, we had...
Okay, so... not true. Marx was definitely a statist. Let's see. There's a quote. No, he was in favor of the dictatorship of the proletariat. What do you think the dictatorship of the proletariat is? It's a worker-controlled state. And by every metric, the USSR and these other countries were dictatorships of the proletariat. They didn't allow or they didn't tolerate private property. I mean, they tolerated personal farms, like if you wanted to grow your own shit, but they didn't tolerate a capitalist class. There was no capitalist class. The capitalists were liquidated. And not only that, but you had like people's tribunals or Soviets, like all the workplaces were organized into Soviets and trade unions and so on. You had like a very complicated bureaucracy for how the economy ran. So yeah, no, I'm getting sidetracked again. Sorry, guys.
The U.S. basically, rigging an election in order to ensure that the Communist Party couldn't get reelected, and we had stuff like that, happen.
I would need to familiarize myself. Is it a little bit weird, do you think, that all of the former officials of the Communist Party ended up becoming like capitalist oligarchs the nanosecond they had the ability to?
Well, all the way up until the mid-1980s, most of the bureaucrats actually had like the workers' best interest at mind. I mean, it was really like the liberalization and reforms. Like what happened is you had these yes men who pretty much infiltrated the party, like the likes of Gorbachev and I forgot his name, but basically they came along and they brought about free speech, and all it really was just a cynical weapon to basically criticize the legitimacy of the Soviet Union and allow a bunch of capitalist rotors into the party. So yeah, no, the people that were responsible for dismantling the USSR decades ago are the ones that materially benefited from it, that were basically capitalist oligarchs. So, I mean, he's not wrong here.
I actually wouldn't call them capitalists according to the Marxist definition, no.
Then there's something worse than capitalists. They leverage state power to seize control of huge amounts of infrastructure, and they're now like these oligarchical billionaires that rule over the wasteland of Russia, like aristocrats. Like Putin was former KGB, right? One of the things that bugs me is when I'm looking like, why do I want capitalism gone? Like, I want to fundamentally abolish these hierarchical relationships between the people and the people who rule. And then like we get the USSR, and it seems like we didn't do anything. Like we swapped a bunch of meaningless pieces around. You know, we painted everything red, and we got our gray Soviet housing blocks, and the state took control of this and that. But then at the end of the day, like the moment the lights came back on, like everybody like shuffled around in their chairs, and bingo, we've got like even more. We've got a situation that is slightly less oligarchical than the fucking Tsar.
Okay. All right. I have a passage that I'd like to read from Farm to Factory that totally dismantles this point that like nothing meaningful got changed. I mean, barring Japan, the USSR was the fastest growing economy on Earth, and living conditions very dramatically and rapidly improved, and people had access to human services, the ability to criticize their boss, they had a job, they had rights. Living conditions were dramatically better, and the level of democracy was massively greater than that of the czarist aristocracy. So he's full of shit on this point. Let me go ahead and actually, you know what? I've got the passages right here. Let's see. It's from page 9. Okay, cool. Sorry I don't have this document ready. I should have had my sources ready before I started this. And Alright, cool, here we are. Soviet performance is much more impressive than the rest of the world, as is the standard. In the late 19th century, Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Thailand, and the Philippines... Wait, you guys can't see this. My bad. Soviet performance is much more impressive than the rest of the world, as is the standard. In the late 19th century, Southeast Asia grew like Russia through integration into the world economy. Growth then slowed until very recent years. The Middle East, here represented by Turkey, Egypt, and Morocco, and China made little progress for much of the century, but also began to grow past the generation. So I know GDP alone doesn't amount to like happiness, but pretty much based on every metric, like the Soviets grew very rapidly relative to the rest of the world. And the reason why they were outpaced by Western Europe and the United States is because to a country, imperialism is like steroids. It gives you access to cheap labor to exploit areas, to dump your pollution without having to worry about your environment. Lots of cheap resources to extract. So it's sort of like when comparing the USSR to like the living standards of the West, it's sort of like comparing, you know, two guys that are working out and lifting weights. One guy's doing it naturally, you know, he's pumping iron, he's making his gains, he's getting bigger and stronger. And the other guy's doing it, but he's on steroids, so he's like completely outpacing him. Of course the countries that are cannibalizing and raping the shit out of the third world are going to grow faster and be able to provide better living standards and superior consumer markets to their people, you know. And otherwise, no, Soviet Union wasn't an oligarchy. That narrative has been completely challenged by like a lot of Western takes. Let me go ahead and continue to play this. Share my screen.
Prior, and it makes me think like there was never really any infrastructure for equality that was built. It was like a really flawed and failed attempt to supplant a previous hierarchy with a new, almost more sinister hierarchy.
Okay, so on this point about hierarchy, Marx was not anti-hierarchy, and that's not really what Marxism is about. This is more the anarchist take about the abolition of unjust hierarchy. My biggest issue with the concept of the unjust hierarchy is that by that definition, literally everybody is an anarchist. Because nobody believes in unjust hierarchy. Nobody, and everybody has a different idea of what a just and unjust hierarchy looks like. To one group of people, they think that the king's right to rule is legitimate. To another group of people, no gods, no masters. And really, it's kind of unscientific, and it seems very subjective, because you could just debate and make arguments about what hierarchies are legitimate and which ones are not. But long story short, socialism is not about abolishing unjust hierarchy. It's about bringing an end to class society.
I mean, fuck, at least in the US we can vote, right? I mean, only party officials can vote in Soviet Russia. And even then they had to make the ballots like closed door because people were afraid of reprisal.
Well, most of the party members in the USSR were actually manual laborers.
Thank you.
Yeah, but it was still 10% of the population, and you're still maintaining a class distinction there.
No, I wouldn't say that, because in order to have a class distinction, you have to purchase means of production, you have to purchase labor power, which...
No, class in a sociological sense. Like, there's still a fundamental distinction.
Okay, so based on your liberal definition of class, they were a class. Based on your unscientific, liberal, idealist definition of what a class is, they were a class. Okay, so let's address the bureaucracy here for a minute. Bureaucrats are not capitalists. They don't exploit wage labor. They cannot decide their own wages. They can't take a steel foundry and turn it into a shoe factory because it's more profitable. They don't own any capital or means of production. They just sort of dictate, quotas and what decisions get made. That's really it. I mean, they're not a unique fucking class. They're just... It's just a form of abstract labor, and the idea that they were just these exploiters. I mean, really, your average high-ranking party official had living conditions comparable to that of an upper middle class person from the United States, while your average Soviet citizen had living conditions comparable to that of lower end of middle class in the United States, at least during the 1960s and 70s. I'll bring up charts on income inequality later to outline my point, but no, it's total false equivalence. These bureaucrats are workers. They're appointed by workers' councils, and then they move up in the party bureaucracy as such.
And yeah, there's still a fundamental distinction between...
and that's not to say there weren't flaws in the Soviet system. There certainly was, and I have my criticisms of the shortcomings of the USSR in that regard, but it was still a more democratic system. This is a very bourgeois conception of fucking what democracy is. Oh, because I get to vote between the lesser of two evils, that means my system's more democratic. According to Vaush, I've heard this from one of his live streams, that because most Americans hate their politicians, that means our system's more democratic because people are allowed to disagree and hate the system. If you have a parliament, a state that doesn't adhere to the needs of the people, that's just completely disconnected from the needs of the people, and the majority of the population absolutely fucking despises it, can that really be said to be democratic at all? No. The Soviet Union's greatest shortcoming was the lack of democracy. It wasn't democratic enough, but it was more democratic than the United States.
Between, the political power and prestige of a party official and of a common worker, even if they work at the same plant. I mean, there are stories of people they'd be afraid to express political dissidence next to people who they thought might be party officials because they knew that they would get credits, they would turn them in, and children would turn in parents to the state, and the state would crack down on black markets even when they were just trying to get razor blades to the population so the men could shave. There was a lot of really horrible stuff going on in the USSR that was unironically worse than America.
Yes, shortage is bad. Why are you comparing the Soviets to the United States?
America is...
This is the point I made earlier, to where you can't really compare. You have to look at countries from similar starting points. You can't just compare the Soviet Union to the United States and Western Europe, countries that have had centuries of colonialism, and they also had 150-year head start to industrialize over the rest of the world. Most of the world was largely undeveloped and unindustrialized a century ago. So this is just it's not really a fair comparison. If you're going to compare the USSR to any country, compare them to Brazil or India, because they came from similar, well, I guess not India, but Brazil or Mexico would be a more fair comparison. And, you know, anyway.
Favorite country, but I don't know, like, how much does it say about our socialist project when like, here's our best effort, and like the USSR is more tyrannical and less efficient than ours?
Well, I think that's a very libertarian argument to make, is to try to compare the USSR, is to try to, we can get to anarchism in a bit when you want, but trying to compare the US to the USSR is very, very difficult, because obviously the USSR went from horse carriages and Rasputin to, you know, having the second highest GDP per capita, which doesn't help.
And outer space. They were the world's first spacefaring nation. Nuclear-powered spacefaring nation, mind you. The first nuclear power plants came out of the Soviet Union. The contributions to the realm of science and human knowledge that they made were vast, even if many of those contributions never materialized in their time.
Please translate to health and happiness, but they did things in their constitution that are absolutely revolutionary that I can't imagine America ever doing, like guaranteeing housing, guaranteeing healthcare. Pragmatically speaking, just living in a Soviet country, I mean, I can't even, you know, I'm 25 next year, or I guess after next year when I'm 27, my health insurance is going to run out for my parents. And, you know, I mean,
I guess, but that's just my issue though. Like, they guaranteed healthcare, but their healthcare was still worse than America's on average per capita. They also lied about a fuck ton of statistics concerning their healthcare shit, because like they knew it would make them look bad if they revealed that they had like entire cities that were relying off like one ventilator, or like 10 hospital beds per 1,000 people.
10 hospital beds per 1,000 people isn't that bad. Let me go ahead and open a document I have showcasing just some statistics on Soviet healthcare. Let's see, health affairs. Oh, here we go. This is what I want. Okay. Over the past 4 decades, the rivalry between the USSR and the United States, one of the Soviet goals in healthcare, as in other areas, was to catch up and surpass the West. Despite relatively comparable populations in size and age distribution, the countries differ in levels of health spending and resources. The Soviet Union has 3 times as many hospital beds and twice as many physicians per capita as the United States, but spends only 1/8 the amounts the United States spends on healthcare services. In 1989, healthcare spending accounted for 3.4% of Soviet gross national product, in contrast to 11.4% of the US GNP. These estimates exclude under-the-table payments to obtain care, which, if estimated, would add to the Soviet health spending, but the share of the economy for health would still be substantially less than the United States. Let's see here. Total population. Number of hospital beds. Hospital beds, resources per 100,000. The Soviet Union had more hospital beds per capita than we did, more physicians per capita than we did, and they had a substantial amount of midwives. I have no idea what a midwife is, but I guess I'm sure it's important. And they didn't spend anywhere near as much on healthcare. Doesn't this sort of speak volumes of the power of like public sector direct central planning and how the public sector shits all over private sector healthcare? Vaush, you're a socialist and you live in America. You of all people should know that capitalist healthcare blows fucking cock. Like the World Health Organization has us like 38th on the fucking list for healthcare efficiency, like in terms of like outcomes and spending and so on. Like American healthcare is a fucking joke. Anyways, so let's do that. So they had, let me look at the statistic for hospital beds per 1,000. I'm trying to find it. Physicians, they had way more physicians, and it is true that they didn't always have the resources they needed. Like, don't get me wrong, shortages were an issue, like in their healthcare system. I mean, I think Vaush is overblowing it. Soviets actually had a pretty good healthcare system when you look on a global scale. And bear in mind that a lot of resources that they could be devoting to healthcare have to be devoted to the arms race as well, which is one of the issues behind the shortages. One, the inability to plan to meet all of the consumer choices due to the limits of archaic Soviet planning. 2, the need to devote a lot of your heavy industry to the literal fucking arms race against the West. And 3, the fact that they were subsidizing the Eastern Bloc and literally all of the socialist regimes on the planet at the time. And in spite of that, in spite of coming from worse conditions, against all odds, against, you know, everything going wrong, they still managed to be America's parallel. I'm looking for this chart that shows the number of hospital beds per 1,000 because I want to make a point. Let's see, number of hospitals, number of beds. Let's see. Here we go. And Soviet Union total. Hospital beds per 1,000 people was 13.6 in the year 1987. Let's look at how many hospital beds are in modern-day Russia. How many hospital beds per capita in glorious modern-day capitalist Russia? Oh, let's see. 8! 8 hospital beds per 1,000 people in Russia. Wow! So that's actually a downgrade! Going from fucking glorious Soviet healthcare to glorious, not-so-socialist healthcare, right? This dude is a fucking numpty. Okay. Let's go ahead and continue.
They guaranteed housing to everyone, but there was, I mean, I don't actually know that much about the homelessness rates in the USSR. I would be very willing to accept the idea that the US had a worse in that respect. But a lot of the housing that they
virtually eliminated homelessness.
Did have was woefully insubstantial and undermaintained. That's like the issue I have. These are like these very tepid, like kind of meaningless gestures at equality. But then like you look up and you're still being ruled over by an authoritarian leader. You still can't like express political dissident without being 1984 or anything. That stuff like really bugs me. I do take a libertarian approach to this.
Okay. I think he has something to say on the commie blocks.
To me, the ultimate goal is the well-being and freedom of the individual. And I think the best way to achieve that is through a socialist or down the line, maybe anarchist society. I don't know if that's what the USSR like did or have or anything. I do respect the achievements in industrialization they engaged in, though, but every country had a giant industrial boom, and Russia is the biggest country on earth. It makes sense that they would have benefited from that massively, whether they were capitalist or socialist. In fact, it was Marx who said that capitalism was a necessary transitional period on the way to socialism, because capitalism best facilitates the material developments that allow for the growth of a socialist society. But Russia didn't do that. They went straight from feudalism to socialism. So it seems like
no, they didn't. They had state capitalism. What do you think the NEP is? They had the NEP, well, they had war communism, then they did the NEP. And then, when they got like the seeds for their industrial base during the new economic policy, that's when they transitioned, like under the Stalin administration. There were some in the parliament that wanted to maintain the NEP. I mean, I know Trotsky wanted to maintain war communism, but Bukharin wanted to maintain the new economic policy. So in that sense, Bukharin was sort of like a dang before dang.
Again, I'm not saying they didn't do like good things ever. It just seems like there were a lot of like really shitty underlying problems that can't really be explained away by American imperialism, or they started off as a feudal country,
Many of them can be explained by those things and other factors as well, such as the geographical determinism. Russia is the largest country on Earth, surrounded by smaller imperialist powers. And one of the policies of Russia as a country has been kind of defensive expansionism. And so Russia surrounded itself with countries to sort of act as like a buffer between them and their enemies. And it's a policy, like chauvinism was definitely an issue in Russia, like Soviet Russia. There was definitely Russia centrism, but Russia, just as a people in general, have always like been very prideful of like their background and who they are. I mean, it's the problem with chauvinism in general. I mean, what are you gonna do? But yeah, no, and it's kind of annoying how he just rules out like material conditions. Like he says he's a materialist, but he just rules out the material conditions that led to the Soviets emerging as they did in the first place. And he just rules out like they were literally like from day one, the West was trying to destroy them. Like, and he just likes to say like, oh, well, the commie blocks, the Khrushchev Kaya or whatever they're called, the fucking tall blocks. Guys, I will take substandard housing. I will gladly sleep in a substandard housing or a substandard apartment block over sleeping under a bypass any day of the week. I've done that before. It's not a lot of fun being exposed to the elements, all right? I will gladly take substandard housing over no housing. Now, I hope you guys are ready for this next take by Vaush, because it's nuclear grade retarded.
Fundamentally, I'm just saying, like, a lot of the problems that the Soviet Union had can't be explained away by industrialization, because every other country was industrializing at the time. I don't think that, like, now, did they do a phenomenal job quickly industrializing? Sure. So did the United States of America. So did Great Britain. So did
Wasn't even fucking close.
Germany. It seems like industrialization was just a thing that was going to happen no matter what, and any sufficiently populous country with a sufficient political will could have probably mobilized their population to a comparable degree. And there were great losses all across.
Not without doing massive amounts of class collaboration. A capitalist countries could industrialize that quickly, like Japan, with active aid from other countries, as well as heavy amounts of class collaboration and collaboration between the bourgeoisie and the state. So it can be done. I'm not saying it can't. I'm just saying on average, socialist countries have done it faster and they've done it better. And to boot, they didn't need a sect of the population hoarding value out of circulation and letting them decide what gets constructed, what gets made, you know, what based on what's profitable, you know.
Across the world. With respect to industrialization, I mean, the USSR, obviously, plenty of people died during the 5-year plans, but holy shit, in the US, in the fucking tenements that we set up outside the factories, a lot of fucking people died too.
So yeah, no, back to the point on industrialization. The Western countries had like literally a 1 to 2 century head start, as well as having colonies and empires like well established around the world to their advantage. And they didn't industrialize in the same time the Soviets did. The Soviets industrialized within a third of the time it took the West to do, all right? And they massively closed the gap within roughly a 30 to 40 year period. So to say that isn't an impressive feat is fucking bullshit. Like I said before, say what you will about Stalin, but the motherfucker made a hell of an omelet.
So the only point I'm getting across here is that there seems like a...
Okay, so people are asking me questions. Okay, let's go ahead and start. Who had a question? And they're good, lived in Khrushchevoika, and I loved it. Okay, well, good. Thank you for vindicating my point. So it wasn't substandard housing after all. It was actually pretty decent. Will you train Jason for the boxing match if it will ever happen between him and Vaush? Yes, I will. I will train him in boxing. I will get him conditioned, and I'll get him in fighting shape within 16 weeks' time. We need, but I could get it done even sooner, within 5 minutes' time, if we did a montage. You know, the Rocky Balboa music. You see Jason, he's like running up the steps and he's like jumping rope. Oh man, fucking, I would gladly coach Jason. But the thing is, the match would be over in like the first 30 seconds, because the second Vaush has to exert himself in any way, he's gonna have a heart attack or a stroke. Have you seen that man? He's pink like a cherry. He looks like he's gonna pop any moment. You know he's got some serious blood pressure. He does not look healthy for a 26-year-old man. I mean, people tell me that I don't look healthy. I just don't sleep enough. Vaush has like terrible health. How much evidence is there of a mixed economy between... Okay, so I've seen this question asked a couple times. How much evidence is there of a mixed economy between co-ops and a centrally planned economy working well? So are you talking about having like a market sector where you have like the co-ops compete, and then you have like the overall backbone and like heavy industry planned by the state? I mean, I think during like a transitionary period, you could have something like that. Ultimately, we want to move away from markets in general, just because you can't really have a power vacuum, and they do trend towards centralization and consolidation inevitably. So if you want to have like your little co-op sector where you have your markets and so on, we can have that for a brief period of time, but the goal should be eventually to move away from markets and eventually get to a planned economy. Yeah, but like Russia was like the dominant country in the USSR, and I'm not saying this is a fault with like the Russia itself. Part of it has to do with the fact that like it's the former Russian Empire. Why don't you like leftism today? All right, so it's just petty Discord drama. I don't really want to get into it. I would have to make a video talking about this in detail. the benefits and flaws of co-ops in a centrally planned economy. Contemporary planned economies really just had issue when it came to light industry and responding to the ever-shifting demands of, consumer choice and inputs. A lot of the issues that plagued these economies yesteryear could be solved through cybernetics and IT. And mind you, if you guys want to know like an example of like central planning working in this day and age, I ask you to look to Walmart or Amazon, because that's basically how they do their economy. They plan according to inputs and then they respond. They utilize Microsoft Excel. They use advanced algorithms to plan their trade routes, their delivery routes, and doing like on-time delivery. So we already use planned economy. Like we trend towards planned economy over time, because the more advanced that a capitalist country becomes, the more its mode of production begins to resemble that of socialism. So we already use central planning. It's just oriented towards making a tiny sliver of the population who's already ultra fucking rich even more rich. Is China moving towards socialism? No. Asking in a good faith as a market socialist in regards to the command economy of ML states, how does it cover for a consumer and buyer's choice? I'll have to get back to you on that. I don't really have a good answer for that right now. I'm not going to lie. Oh yeah, no, because I've said this. I think India has a lot of potential. Elaborate in a prediction for a communist revolution in India. I think communists could win the South, but I think the fascists would keep the North. True. I mean, India could balkanize because there's a lot of provinces where the government reigns supreme, and then you have provinces where the Naxals are in charge, and there's strong presence of the CPI Maoists. I think in a best case scenario, they take the whole country. In a worst case scenario, India balkanizes. I do believe that the instability brought by climate change will turn India into a failed state, and it is within, it is within India becoming a failed state. I believe that the communists will have the best chance to secure power within the coming vacuum. Okay, my ideal communist country. Well, my ideal communist country is one where money has been done away with, where there's no more private owners, there's no more exploitation. The economy is planned centrally where it needs to be, like you could like your national healthcare system and heavy industry, and then decentral planned where it makes the most sense, like localized production using 3D printers and micro factories. You have the heavy industry like sending the raw materials to the individual communes, and then you leave it up to the communes to decide what they produce, when, where, and how. And you have advanced computers streamlining the planning process. You have direct labor accounting using labor vouchers that's tied to your Social Security. And you do labor accounting in kind. And fuck, I hate it when I lose track of what I was going to say. Long story short, oh yeah, right, radical democracy. I believe any decisions that can be made at a local level or a systematic level that don't require like really complex bureaucracy or like professionalism to understand, like, basic issues like, should weed be legal? Should we have a national healthcare plan? These simple basic questions should just be voted on by an app on the public. Does the public want free healthcare? Well, now they have free healthcare. Does the public want us to pave a road this way? Okay, cool. But when it comes to like how that road is paved and how the complex healthcare plan operates, I believe that those are the sort of decisions that should really be left to like some sort of bureaucrat or planning apparatus, because a lot of people don't have the time or patience to have that direct decision making. People are going to gravitate towards what they're good at, what they like, and what they're interested in, and I think the chips will fall as they may over time. But ideally, I'd like communism, as Marx envisioned it centuries ago. Okay, cool. Let's go ahead and get back to Vaush. We might not have time to go over all half hour of this. I didn't anticipate this to be this long. All right, cool.
a lot of parallels here that, that don't meaningfully address the underlying problem that, for all of its talk and pretense, the Soviet Union never really meaningfully did anything that it claimed to do. And to your earlier example,
emancipating women's rights, granting equal rights to various ethnic groups, guaranteeing healthcare, housing, education, and jobs as rights, providing reasonably good living standards on a global scale, and doing it without having to imperialize other countries. These aren't worthwhile achievements. Workplace democracy, having a state that actually gives a fuck about your well-being. These aren't really achievements. No, they were better off under the czars. Are you fucking serious? Oh, I'm just gonna dismiss the USSR for all of its achievements because it's easier for me to defend my little liberal anarchist position where I don't actually have to educate myself and I can just be intellectually lazy and reaffirm anti-communist propaganda, you know? What a wonderful world.
I would much rather live in a society where healthcare isn't a guaranteed right, but people still generally have better healthcare, than a society where it is a guaranteed right, but there's woefully insubstantial medical coverage because the society isn't wealthy enough to actually cover the needs of the people. I prefer the outcome to the intention any day of the week. Now this isn't meant to be like me railing against socialism or anything. It's not. But the USSR was never socialist, and nor was Mao's China. I mean, none of these countries ever even came close to a truly democratized workplace. I think it's easy to abolish
the siege model,
especially if you're willing.
They had to adhere to the siege model.
But to me, the most important precept here is democracy. It's about freedom. It's about well-being. And
it's about your liberal petite bourgeois interpretation of what freedom and liberty is. Because later on, when you get to defending the kulaks, you reveal your class nature as the petite bourgeois socialist that you are.
I don't know how this reification of those societies serves us in that goal.
Well, I think pragmatically, the USSR was a lot better than Tsarist Russia. I mean, Lenin wrote various books on women's struggles. Ethnic groups and minorities, such as the Jews, actually had rights, voting rights,
until Stalin came along.
Well.
No,
it's a bit of a complicated history. I mean, if you want to
that's a pretty big failing if you can't prevent literal totalitarians from seizing your government. That hasn't happened in the U.S. yet. Got some really.
Oh wait. So we didn't jam a bunch of Japanese people into concentration camps? That never happened. Settler colonialism, that never happened. Like the straight up removal of all these indigenous ethnic groups. So when America does ethnic cleansing, it doesn't count. But when the Soviets do population transfers out of fear that certain ethnic groups can and will collaborate with the Nazis, because apparently they have, or there's tensions between different ethnic groups. And mind you, they had cities built for these people. It's not like they just went out in the middle of nowhere and they just dropped them off out in Siberia with nothing. Like, they built cities for these population groups that they moved around. And so I suppose that's not as bad as jamming them all into concentration camps, but I still disagree with it.
Bad presidents, but nothing even close to Stalin. That's a pretty severe failing of the internal political workings of the Soviet Union.
Hold on. What is your answer to the femboy question? Fuck them. Straight to the gulag.
Well, hold on. Before we go into the political workings, I want to talk about the base for a minute, all right? Let's get dialectical here. So,
just kidding, comrade. Femboys are a part of my revolution just as much as everybody else. Everyone is welcome in, well, not my revolution, this is our movement. There I go with the fucking ego.
You say that socialism, or you say that the USSR was state capitalist, but you know the three things that I mentioned earlier that you can get directly from Marx himself in Capital Volume 1. Generalized commodity production. There was no generalized commodity production. There was no wage labor, and there was no profiteering. It was according to a plan. So
that's not true. There wasn't wage labor because there wasn't money, but surplus value was still extracted from all the workers who had no control whatsoever in the production or the nature of their of their work. It was still like authoritarian leaders who owned, albeit indirectly through party control, factories where people who were not paid or compensated for the full value.
That's right. It was literally slavery. It was slave labor. Soviets had no freedom. They didn't have the second highest GDP per capita, compared to the United States. That's very true, Vaush. Wonderful. Great analysis. Great comprehension. You aren't just parroting a bunch of anti-communist Cold War tropes.
Their labor worked tirelessly. They went even a step farther because in the Soviet Union, sometimes they would move people. Like, they would move people to a new district to work. And we don't do that over here.
Oh, boo-hoo! They moved people around when they had labor shortages for specialists in labor during their early developments. I don't really think it's a good idea to do that because you're going to make people resent you. But these decisions were made for a reason. You know, it's sort of like if I were to say, like, oh, well, George Washington killed 20 million black people without providing any sort of like context about like the actual history that went on. You know, like imagine if we did this. Imagine if we did look at like when people are fucking adulating the founding fathers of the United States, you know, and every time they talked about how great the American Revolution was and the glory of the founding fathers and what they did for this country and the Constitution. Imagine every time if that, you know, conservatives did that, we're like, how could you glorify George Washington? He was a multi-billionaire by today's standards and owned slaves and killed millions of Indians, you know? Like imagine if we did this same liberal whining that they did. Like, but no, they have all the leeway to fucking nail us to the cross over the excesses committed by communist regimes. When you actually compare like the mistakes and the fuck ups of both systems, capitalism wins by like long shot.
You can move to a new city if you want to, but the state can't force you to move over to Albuquerque, so you can keep working as a satellite engineer.
Well, Marx actually never said that workers would receive what they fully produced. That was actually a critique he made of Lassalle, Ferdinand Lassalle. And
I'm not saying, just to clarify, I'm not saying fully.
Okay.
I'm just saying that they got like nothing from it. Incredibly industrious and productive Soviet workers went back.
And that's a good point. They moved people. Look at the Poles today, Vaush. They go everywhere in Europe to work. Okay, so there aren't forced relocations under capitalism. You don't have peasantry that are kicked off their land because it's been privatized by capitalists that are forcibly proletarianized into cities during the early stages of capitalist developments. You don't have fucking areas where there's no unemployment, so people are forced to move in order to work. I mean, yeah, it's not directly coercive at the barrel of a gun, but people are still being coerced based on economic pressures to move around. So I don't know what to say besides that. Fuck you.
Back to their shit apartments, their tiny little tenements, with the scantest bit of like luxury goods that they had like available to them.
Well, then again, I would have to, you know, attribute most of that to the absolute raising that happened during World War II. But
again, substandard housing is better than no housing. Moving on.
Economically speaking, right? There was no buying and selling of the means of production. There was no, and you also said something about surplus value, but it's hard to think about surplus value because what Marx theorized value to be, and I don't want to get too technical here, but Marx essentially imagined that you have to have generalized commodity production in order to have that passing from private to social. In other words, you have to have generalized commodity production to have, you can have surplus extraction, but you wouldn't have surplus value because they weren't working to increase their exchange value. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but do you see how this is you like kind of wiggling around like 150-year-old terms to explain away the fact that the Soviet Union preserved the same basic class distinctions as the United States, except worse?
No. He just literally explained how they did not.
That's my main issue. Well, like we can talk about like, well, there was no buying and selling of the commodity, like
yeah, that's a key part of capitalism.
Yeah, but it's utterly irrelevant to the actual livelihood and well-being of the millions of people who were in the Soviet Union. Like nobody would go like, man, this sucks. I hate the fact that this is like being owned by a capital owner. I'm beholden to a party official who controls my workplace and demands of me a certain level of output, and I get nowhere near the total level of productivity that I produce in this factory. And then someone else taps him on the shoulder and he's like, no, you don't understand. There's no generalized commodity production, and the means of production are bought and sold. So this is totally different, even though like it doesn't actually affect the bourgeois. But then their surplus value is.
Cry me a fucking river. Oh no, I have a boss! No, I have targets I need to meet. I have a job that I need to perform. Oh no! Oh, you poor thing. You poor little baby. You're soft, man.
Extracted by the Soviet state, right? Like Kulaks had to, like they didn't.
Well, that's just taxes.
Yeah, but there's a pretty big difference between just taxes and the state is going to take basically everything you can give them. Also, you have to be production quotas or you're in trouble.
Well, the state didn't take everything they had. Like private, I don't want to say privately owned, but cooperatives that had a constitutional right to their own capital, they kept surplus. So basically, how the system works is you work, you pay your workers, you pay your machinery, and then you have what's left over. Now, parts of this is going to go to yourselves and to the state, and that's how it operated in the USSR. That's exactly what Marx was talking about. That's exactly how a socialist society would work.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not opposed to taxes at all, but the kulaks were subservient to the state as like any other entity. Like, that's why what happened to them happened to them, because like,
well, they weren't subservient to the state. They actually defied the state by
committing acts of terrorism. Defiance can only take place in the context of subservience. Otherwise, there's nothing to be defiant to.
Oh yeah, there's a point I forgot to review. Hold on a second. Let me go back a bit.
Wealthy enough to actually cover the needs of the people. I prefer the outcome to the intention any day of the week. Now this isn't meant to be like me railing, holy shit, in the US, in the fucking tenements that we set up outside the factories, a lot of fucking people died too. So the only point that I'm getting across here is that there seems like there are a lot of parallels here that, that don't meaningfully address the underlying problem that, for all of its talk and pretense, the Soviet Union never really meaningfully did anything that it claimed to do. And to your earlier example, I would much rather live in a society where healthcare isn't a guaranteed right, but people still generally have better healthcare, than a society where it is a guaranteed right, but there's woefully insubstantial medical coverage because the society isn't wealthy enough to actually cover the needs of the people.
So I wanted to replay that just because I'm like, you heard it here, folks. Vaush prefers private healthcare that's higher quality, because he can afford it, and because some people can afford it and have decent healthcare, to substandard healthcare that everyone has access to. Beacon of socialist light, the shining path to communism, led by Fat Destiny with the man bun. You heard it right here, in favor of private healthcare. I mean, I've already addressed this point on how private healthcare is actually absolute dog shit compared to socialized healthcare, and it's borne out heavily, very well documented in the data. Don't need to review this again. I'm going back to minute 16. Here we go.
Do you want the citation? He was appointed. He didn't win a democratic election. He was appointed.
He got like 30% of the vote prior, and then he was appointed. These were legal processes.
Yeah, but he made himself a dictator illegally by changing the constitution.
And is it legal to murder your opponent, Trotsky?
Well, the murdering happened a lot longer, but even before that,
he chased Trotsky. No, he chased Trotsky out.
He chased Trotsky out of the country because he was guilty of fucking treason. Like, you realize on every country on earth, the punishment for treason is death, right? Not to mention, like, Trotsky was a fucking opportunistic snake conspiring with his clique to have Stalin pulled undemocratically. Like, so no, the chasing out of Trotsky was completely justified, and the ice pick was a long time coming.
There was a. Oh my God! I'm sorry. I haven't read up on my Stalin shit for a while. The idea that Stalin succeeding Lenin was an act of democracy is ludicrous.
Do you want the citation?
Stalin, you can send me a citation if you want. I'm sorry. Was this party democracy or was this real democracy?
Well, the word "real" kind of begs a question because the way the Soviet system.
I don't think a society that only lets 10% of its party elites vote is actually a democratic society.
Well, who do you think got those people in power in the first place? Was it the state? Was it the autonomous being of the state or the workers?
You're defending an oligarchy. You're saying because Stalin was a strong man who was able to get party officials in power, that their voting for him was legitimate. You're literally defending an oligarchy right now. You realize that, right?
Well, I mean, I'd like you to answer. Well, okay, I'm defending an oligarchy. Well, I wouldn't actually call it an oligarchy.
No. I'm sorry. You cannot. You're right. It's worse than an oligarchy. It's
actually not.
Stalin killed other oligarchs. He would disappear people in the middle of the night if he didn't like where they were going.
Jeez.
Oh my God. Here we go. Oh yeah, guys. Stalin literally killed everyone. He killed literally everybody on planet Earth. He killed me. He killed you guys. We're actually living in a simulation right now. This is the Matrix. Stalin killed 500 bajillion people, and he killed everyone who had a different opinion. He just, ate all the grain, paid the clouds not to rain, and let all the poor Ukrainians starve. He crushed all the political opposition, even though, like, if this were true, then why is it that all the way up to the Moscow trials, the point of the Moscow trials, if like opposition wasn't tolerated in the party, then why were there literal capitalist roaders that were tolerated for decades in the party, as well as like the left opposition and so on? And you had like genuine conspiracies and like fifth columns operating within the apparatus of the party that were plotting a coup to basically overthrow Stalin's sect. So like the Communist Party is by no means a monolith. And it's just kind of silly to me. Like, the history is so much more complicated than just my mustache man bad, my mustache man kill people. Stalin, he was put in power by the Central Committee of the party. He couldn't get whoever he wanted put in the positions that he wanted them to be put in. Like, he couldn't have whoever he wanted and whatever he wanted. Like, there was like a bureaucracy and a legal apparatus, and like Stalin lost out in the party when it came to like certain decisions. Like for example, like one of the things is just railing against the bureaucracy. Yeah, he was the most powerful man in the country, but he's not like this omnipotent dictator that was just in absolute control of absolutely everything.
Stalin was a paranoid man. He would literally like wake up in a fever and then have people disappear because he had dreams that they were going to backstab him.
Well, I think the entire Central Committee had good reason to be paranoid, but I mean, I can think about that. But really,
so You're defending totalitarianism.
Well, these are all just Vaush, these are all just empty words. These are 100% empty words.
Democracy is an empty word. I'm sorry.
You just said the word totalitarianism. You just said the word.
What kind of totalitarian system lets you criticize and fire and hire your own bosses?
That was from an alt-writer. Yeah, the last time I heard that was from an alt-writer.
Okay, I'm an alt-writer. Congratulations. Look, Vaush.
Why?
Hold on. Look, Vaush. The thing that you do on your streams is you go about and you say words like totalitarianism and authoritarian. You never define them.
These are words that. No, wait. I'm sorry. Do you think that if I Google the definition of the term totalitarian, it's not going to describe Stalinist Russia?
Well, give me a definition.
Let's just Google it because
it was totalitarian dictatorship of class. Yes. Reactionaries, capitalist roaders, ex-capitalists, kulaks were all prosecuted. They were purged. They were pretty much leveled and destroyed. This is true. It was a totalitarian dictatorship of class.
Okay. I mean, I'm sure you're aware
you realize what you're doing right now. I've literally had this conversation word for word with Nazis. Like, you think Hitler was a totalitarian? There were dissenting parties and movements. You can't possibly say Hitler was actually well loved by people. I have heard all of these arguments from neo-Nazis. The fact that you would shoot
that's a bit of a horseshoe theory, isn't it?
That would only be the case if you were actually a leftist, my friend. The fact that I have all these arguments from Nazis and their effort to defend their failed state as you try to defend yours is fucking insane to me. Why would you ever do this? Like, do you really think you're representing the will of the people, the interests of the proletariat? Or you're defending fucking Stalin? It's always, okay. A system of government that is central.
Anyways, yeah, more whining, more horseshoe theory. I mean, I don't have anything to say about it. I cannot believe that that someone who's like such a prominent figure on the left is unironically spouting horseshoe theory. Like, it's just insane to me. Okay, so we're equivalent to the Nazis. Last I checked, the Nazis started the Holocaust. We ended the Holocaust. So make of that as you will.
It's anarchist Catalonia.
Yeah, okay, I'm not here to defend anarchist Catalonia.
So what?
Oh yeah, that's right. Vaush doesn't know what anarchist Catalonia is. Champion of anarchism and libertarian socialism doesn't even know his own history. What you gonna do?
Do you have any previous society that has ever existed in history?
Irrelevant to what we're talking about right now.
No, it's completely relevant because, like, your conceptualization of socialism is completely non-falsifiable because we don't have any examples to go off of. And the reason why we uphold the Soviet Union is because it is an example of socialism working. For all of its flaws, blunders, and excesses and fuck-ups, it was, for all intents and purposes, the first socialist regime. And because it was the first, it was the worst. We will have better in the future if capitalism doesn't rape and kill us all.
Why the fuck are you defending?
Because it's an idea that only exists in your head. I can't argue with ideas that only exist in your head.
Market socialism.
No, your ideology.
Congratulations, Vegas Con.
Okay, so this is where we get into the Holodomor. So Vaush actually has a reasonable take the first 2 minutes of this, and I'm gonna let him speak and have his piece. And it's funny how he even acknowledges like that what went on in the USSR isn't even close to comparable to like Britain's activities in India, but he still like pushes like the same liberal narrative. I'm gonna review like the next 10 minutes and we're gonna call it a day. Excuse me. I'm gonna let him talk. I'm gonna go take a piss. I'll be right back.
Good luck with the titty skills. Can you go into the Holodomor? Really bad difference in the UK. Is there a difference between the UK generally letting millions of starve and the UK purposely starving 35 million Indians? Okay, whoa. There is a huge difference between what Stalin did during the Holodomor and like the Indian people dying, okay? And that difference is what Britain did was much, much worse. What Britain did was 1,000 billion times worse. It was like 1,000,000 trillion times worse. Like, holy shit, it was so much, much worse. What Britain did, what fucking England did to India was like, Stalin doesn't even fucking come close. Holy shit. No, for real though. Okay, so here's what's the difference? Okay, so here's what happened. Okay. So here's what happened in India. Britain colonized India, the crown jewel of its empire, so it could get spices and juicy big brain, big dollar money, imperialist money, cash dollar, thug, easy cream. That's what they wanted. And over the course of like a century of English rule, there were repeated famines that were deliberate products of English policy. I think Churchill specifically, I forget the name of the famine, but the, excuse me. But Churchill thought like Indians were subhuman, and he literally starved out millions of them deliberately just to quell like the Bengal famine, yeah, just to quell like Indian independence movements. Like what? So like it was 100% genocide. It was the easiest genocide. Why do we celebrate him? I don't celebrate Winston Churchill. Do you celebrate Winston Churchill? I'm sorry. Do we have any Winston Churchill celebrators here?
Yeah, so this is like his last reasonable take, and I actually 100% agree with him here. What the Soviets did to Ukraine isn't even close to comparable to what the Western colonial powers have been doing for like literal centuries. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the book. It's called The Late Victorian Holocausts, and I was reading about it. The Late Victorian Holocausts, the El Nino famines, and the making of the Third World. I need to get through it, but it's basically about how there were some really serious droughts, typhoons, and like a litany of natural disasters that just obliterated crops in Southeast Asia and like India and China that led to some famines that were basically made worse by Western colonial powers because they basically privatized the grain and sold them at market equilibrium prices. And just because market equilibrium, the market decides what the prices are, doesn't mean it's going to reach the most amount of people possible. If there's more money in charging extra for grain than what you could reach with the general populace, they're going to do it. So they basically arbitrarily just let tens of millions of people starve to death. And then they did like really, really like pathetic aid that didn't really amount to anything. So it's a good book, Late Victorian Holocausts. It's about how a series of bad famines were made worse and exasperated by British colonial policy and Western colonial policy.
Libs do? Oh, of course libs do. When the fuck have libs given a shit over the genocide of brown people? Yeah, because he had the funny one-liners. Haha. I'm looking at the Czech Communist Party. It appears to be popular mostly with older citizens, and its share of the parliamentary vote is decreasing. Boomers! Boomers! Anyway, in regards to about 60 million people died over the course of British period in like the 1930s or whatever, right? It was a big old famine, okay? The famine wasn't really Stalin's fault, okay? That's like that, what are you gonna do, okay? However, economic policies were implemented that ended up worsening the conditions of the famine rather than making them better. For instance, people were kept from leaving the area that that the famine was taking place in. The Soviet Union prevented people from leaving that to more prosperous, fruitful areas. Additionally, the USSR was at that point in time maintaining a grain surplus. They were exporting grain, which is this also coincides with a at the time there was a sort of an ethnic group. There was like an ethnic political.
Okay, so let's address the people not allowed to move around. In general, you don't really want people to move around during a famine because they're just going to go where the food's at, and you need people to stay put, and you need to spread out the grain as evenly and proportionately, like the relief, the aid. You need to spread it out evenly and proportionately, and you can't do that if people are abandoning large swaths of regions in search for food. So that's the reason why they forced everyone to stay and keep put. All right? I mean, what are you going to do? It is what it is.
It depends. But there was a group of people in the region called, they stopped exports, check the numbers. D-King, I could be wrong on this. D-King, you're like on the cusp of a ban because you're an annoying tanky cunt anyway. But D-King, if you can provide to me right now a link indicates that the Ukrainian region was starving, there was a whole lot of political propaganda that was disseminated throughout the Soviet Union about how the Kulaks were like bourgeois counter-revolutionaries. So what happened ultimately was a famine in a region was worsened by the economic policies of that government. And didn't they also kill cattle and burn fields? Yeah, dude, just gotta protest the government. What are you gonna do?
I can't believe he's cool with that. Imagine being okay with people hoarding food and like burning cattle that could be used to like help your fellow man. Like imagine hoarding grain during a famine. I'm sorry, but you deserve to be fucking shot if you're burning your own fields and like killing your own cattle while your neighbors next door are literally fucking starving. Fuck that, dude. Fuck that noise.
They reduced it, they didn't end it. Hold on, let me look. Okay.
Yeah, like that's the thing. Daniel G brought up a good point. The Soviets could only trade in grain. It was the only commodity that they had available. And had they not sold the grain, had they just cut exports and started importing grain to end the famine, the issue is they wouldn't have been able to industrialize. And they had a lot of contracts going on for purchasing factory equipment, and it would have voided a lot of those contracts if they weren't able to raise the funds to keep up with their end of the bargain. Like, they desperately needed to industrialize. There's a quote by Stalin in one of his speeches in, I believe, 1929, that he's saying, like, they're gonna come for us. Like, the Western powers basically had 100 years to industrialize. We have 10. So Lenin and Stalin actually predicted the World War II in a sense. Lenin actually believed there was going to be a series of world wars spanning throughout the century as colonial powers clash and have border conflicts with one another because they've reached the edges of the territory that they can capture. There's a lot of stuff he couldn't have foreseen that nobody could have foreseen at the time, like the existence of nukes and like Britain and France and Germany giving up their colonies, giving up their vassal states. But yeah, no, the Soviets desperately needed to industrialize, and cutting grain exports completely and import it wasn't a choice. They could not do that because, I mean, the option is, okay, we do what we can about this famine and we industrialize at breakneck pace, or we don't do that and we're only halfway finished industrializing, and we get invaded by the Germans, and they basically kill everybody, because that's exactly what the Germans were planning on doing. They were planning on opening up big old concentration camps and basically turning all of Eastern Europe into one giant settler colony slave state. Like, they wrote about this shit. Like, they had plans. Like, what they were doing to the Jews, they were planning on doing to Eastern Europeans as well. Like, they considered Slavs subhuman. And they were taking notes from the United States on how to do settler colonialism, basically. They believed in manifest destiny and a lot of similar ideas to the Founding Fathers.
Grain exports in...
Yeah, so they did lower grain exports.
Units. Note that exports, which were used to fund imports of industrial equipment, continued despite the famine. Yeah, like, this is still bad, guys. For you fucking Holodomor stands, for you to still be exporting this much grain and not be importing, like, what the Soviet Union should have done if it really cared about saving those lives was cut exports completely and bring in imports, like import millions of tons. But they didn't.
But they did. Correct me if I'm wrong, but did they not import, like, rice and grains from India? Like, I forget the country. It was either India or Genghis Khan land. Why, I can't, the name is on the tip of my tongue. Mongolia, yes, Mongolia. I believe they did bring in aid and bring in grain, and I actually have, like, quotes or a chart from Wheatcroft's Years of Hunger that showcases that. Do you guys want me to pull it up? Yes, no, maybe. Anyways, you know, fuck it. I'll just bring it up. I'll go ahead and bring up Wheatcroft Years of Hunger. All right, here we go. I believe page 480, where they basically. So no, they did do aid. They did send, like, seedlings and grain and like seed loans and so on to the afflicted regions, and they gave, like, timely deliveries, you know, on, like, a monthly basis throughout 1932 and 1933. I'm just trying to find it in this big old book. State fodder loans and aid, February to July, thousands of tons. Okay, cool. So in March, they got 15.6 thousand tons. Yeah, so yeah, in 1932, 1933, and they... Here, I'll just go ahead and pull it up on screen. All right, here we are. All right, cool. State food loans and aid, February to July 1933, in thousands of tons. State seed and loan aids, thousands of tons. Large swaths, month after month, getting sent to Volga, Ukraine, and different regions. So they were giving aid, and they were sending aid to the afflicted regions. And it's not like there wasn't an effort made to do relief during the famine. Don't get me wrong, like, it was a massive economic blunder and fuck up on the part of Stalin, like Stalin's government. But how could it not be? It was literally the first time that collectivization, a project of that scale, had ever been undertaken. They had no prior model to work off of. And then a famine vulnerable region of the world had a famine. And I mean, I'm just going to say they did the best they could. They probably could have managed their resources better. I don't think they just callously and arbitrarily let people starve to death. I just think they were caught between a rock and a hard place. I mean, but what are you going to do? Let's see. I'm not really familiar with Siberia's famine. Oh yeah, Kazakhstan and Ukraine were the two regions most heavily affected by the famine. I believe modern demographer estimates it's like, what, 2 million dead in Ukraine, about 1 million dead in Kazakhstan. I mean, it was terrible. I mean, and not only that, but like neighboring countries, parts of Russia were affected. The factors in the famine included infection of crops, drought, irregular weather events, Kulak sabotage, and the shock of rapid compulsory collectivization. These factors basically compounded onto one another, and that's ultimately what led up to the famine. But for Vaush here to fucking say the Kulaks didn't deserve it. No, the Kulaks deserved it. I'm sorry. Here we go.
Didn't do that because the industrial equipment was just more important than millions of lives. What are you gonna do?
Okay, so we don't industrialize, and we instead prioritize all of our resources to circumventing the famine, and you know, we save hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of lives. And we don't industrialize at breakneck pace, and the Germans invade and come in and they clean up house. I mean, that's the alternative, in which case, instead of 26 million people dead on the Eastern Front, you probably would have had about 100 million dead on the Eastern Front.
Batman Massive sent a nice understanding message to me. I just want to yell at people. Weren't the Kulaks just rich farmers with a lot of land that purposefully refused collectivization and burned crops and killed cattle? See, that's kind of the tanky take right there. Yeah, if you buy into Soviet propaganda, all of the Kulaks were all rich farmers that were all selfishly hoarding land and burning and killing and such. Yeah, that was the propaganda take that you're...
Not just Kulaks, but like reactionary peasants as well that opposed collectivization. I know what he's talking about, where like, oh, well, you could be considered a Kulak for having a few more acres than your neighbor, or you could be considered a Kulak for having like 1 or 2 people employed underneath you. Guys, if you employ and exploit wage labor, you're not a peasant. You're a petty proprietor. So, sorry, we're taking a new direction. We're going towards a society that's free of capitalist exploitation. So, for all the blunders, flaws, and excesses, I mean, it is what it is. Like, the Kulaks were vultures, and even then, it wasn't just the state coming in. It was also like a populist movement from the bottom up. Like, weren't there a lot of teenagers that were in favor of collectivization as well? Like, based anonymous person in Vaush's chat. Seed for seed, rust, poor wheat, collectivization. You know, we'll just roll with it.
Disseminating right there? No. A lot of the people that were called Kulaks were just like legitimately protesting the USSR, and their protest happened to coincide with the famine. And the USSR still failed to respond appropriately to the Holodomor. Kulaks weren't an ethnic group. There is some conflation with that. You're going to get ties of ethnicity anytime you're dealing with imperialism. Kulaks are middle-class farmers.
Collectivization is imperialism.
I know, guys. They were Ukrainian. They were in the Ukrainian region. So when propaganda was made against them, even though the term Kulak did not specifically refer to an ethnic group, the way in which that propaganda was disseminated had ethnic components. Why am I avoiding the big... I'm going to fucking kill myself. Show evidence the Kulaks didn't burn their crops and kill their cattle? I never said they didn't. What?
No, he's cool with it because he doesn't believe in collectivization, apparently. He apparently doesn't understand how socialism works. Like Vaush, you can't just have socialism in the cities and then capitalism in the countryside. Like that's like a blatant contradiction. And I don't really see how I don't really see how having like a small sect of the population hoarding food and profiting off of a famine is really beneficial to the developments of a third world country. I'm not going to lie.
But the portrayal of them as like bougie counter-revolutionaries who were like hoarding grain while everyone around them died is 100% fucking Stalinist propaganda.
Oh yeah, it's just Stalinist propaganda. Should I bring up some historical anecdotes? Should I bring up another view on Stalin? Just curious. Nah, we'll just go.
How is crop burning a justification, though, when you're protesting an authoritarian imperialist government? I'm sorry, wait, wait. I'm sorry, would we be talking about this shit if there was a group of Indians under fucking British colonial rule that fucking hoarded their, like, who fucking protested against England by not giving them, like, dividends of spices?
Okay, so this is kind of a false equivalence. The Brits were exporting food even during famine-riddled regions on a basis for profit. They were trying to profit off of the grains as much as possible and like the food and so on. The Soviets were exporting grain in a desperate race to industrialize and protect the regime from an incoming genocidal horde. And it's not imperialism, it's land reform. It's the collectivization and modernization of their agriculture that they desperately needed. I mean, which ended up helping them down the line in the long run. I mean, and mind you, collectivization and their actions that year actually brought an end to the cyclical famine cycle that plagued the countryside for literal centuries. I mean, would it have just been better not to collectivize? Would it have just been better to let private landowners profiteer even during famine areas and just, you know, have inferior agriculture and just deal with famines for like the rest of time? Or, you know, you have your quick rapid collectivization, industrialization, you know, get it over with, get it out of the way. You have your famine now, you deal with it, you never have another famine again, and your country prospers in the long run. You know, I'm just saying it would have been worse not to collectivize in the grand scheme of things.
We say the same thing about them, and fucking millions of Indians died because of the failed economic policies of the English, and then it turns out, oh, they were also counter-protesting against the English, against the despotism, and hoarding their fucking spices and shit and burning shit. Would you go like, oh yeah, well they deserved it actually, because actually it's counter-imperialist of them to hoard their shit. Like, shut the fuck up. No one would do this. People, this is Yankees doing this shit all the fucking time. They'll defend the wildest shit just because it happened in the Soviet Union or China or whatever.
It's total false equivalence. It was not imperialism, it was land reform. It was not colonialism, it was collectivization, turning private property into collective property. They turned them into cooperative farms, the kolkhozy, and then they eventually went on to become state farms, and they eventually went on to industrialize and modernize their agriculture. It's a absolute false equivalence. Let me ask you something, man. Did the Britons come in and do anything to modernize India's agriculture? Did the Britons come in and like do anything to like try and end the cyclical famines that plagued the countryside for literal centuries? No. The Britons just came in and they fucking exploited the shit out of the local populace, you know, to enrich their own domestic capitalist class. So this is like a total false equivalence. Let's fast forward. Here we go.
Category of affluent peasants in the later Soviet Empire, particularly Soviet Russia and Azerbaijan, targeted as enemies, and large numbers were liquidated by Stalin in the 1930s. Independent farmers emerged from the peasantry and became wealthy following the Stalin reform beginning in 1906. During the Russian Revolution, the label of kulak was used as an epithet for any peasant who resisted handing over his grain to requisitions for the Bolshevik government. Damn! Joseph Stalin's all-out campaign to collectivize the peasantry meant that peasants with a couple of cows or 5 or 6 acres more than their neighbors were labeled kulaks. Oh, darn! So kulaks initially referred to wealthy peasants who extended beyond the peasantry, becoming landowners, but then people started calling anyone who had anything more than their neighbors kulaks. Darn! As a way of criminalizing people who resisted colonial imperialism from the USSR.
As a way to resist people that wanted to maintain their private property and not, you know, submit to compulsory. Like, dude, how the fuck do you think socialism works? Like, are we really just gonna like tolerate having petty proprietors and like, you know, these individualistic like private owners? No, like collectivization is a necessary part of the transition into socialism. Like, what are you supposed to do? Just tolerate an emerging petite bourgeois? Like, just tolerate an emerging capitalist class, an emerging landlord class? Like, what the fuck? Why are you playing defense for private property? I thought you were a socialist, dude.
Damn.
And yeah, he's using Wikipedia as a source. He's sourcing that from Wikipedia. No, the protesting went on before and during the famine. It didn't start and end like it didn't start and end at the beginning. And even at first, I believe in the very beginning of the first 5-year plan, it was actually like optional. Like it was voluntary collectivization. But like by 1930, 1931, large swaths of land were not collectivized yet, so there was like a hardline push into like the early 1930s, like 1931, 32, to like finish transforming the countryside into kolkhozy and liquidating the last of the petite bourgeois and the kulak as a class. Like the kulaks were they were a class, you know. Anyways. Well, the British pulled all the food from Bengal to use as theaters during the war. Also, the British did nothing to stop the famine while Americans agreed to help. True, true, true. Yeah. Like I said, the Brits didn't do shit, and collectivization was done for the good, for the long-term good of the regime. Like, it would have been worse not to collectivize. It would have been worse to not do what they did, you know? The Soviets did what had to be done, and you know, this fucking moralizing, this liberal whining about all of the people, you know, the people who starved, and it was a tragedy. It was terrible that people starved. There were definitely abuses and excesses that went on in that process. But what the fuck do you think a revolution is, dude? Like, if you want to sit in your house and play video games, then do that. But, you know, the revolution's not a dinner party. People die. It is the overthrow and the imposition of one class's will on another. Like, I'm surprised you don't know this as a goddamn socialist.
Darn! It's almost like authoritarian governments will jumble up terminology in a deliberate effort to get public opinion against the people they're committing fucking crimes against humanity against. Ooh, yeah. I mean, I'm a kulak, kind of, if you think about it. I make more than the average worker.
See, he just revealed his hand. This is his class position. Vaush makes hundreds of thousands of dollars off of his streaming enterprise, his establishment, and he cares more about his public image, and he cares more about winning the popularity contest and making as much money as possible and protecting and securing his brand than he does about taking a principled stance, like a correct, principled leftist stance on the issues. So, I mean, it just goes to show he's in it for the money. I mean, it is what it is.
That's a spicier meatball. This is exactly what I fucking mean. See, people are like, oh, kulak actually specifically refers to the type of land. These kulaks are all land-owning bourgeois who selfishly hoarded grain outside of a fucking outside of the famine. When in reality, if you look at it, kulak was just whoever Stalin could call a kulak. A kulak was anybody who had just a little bit more, just a little tiny bit more.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, we need to fucking liquidate Vaush. We need to. Seriously. Yeah, exactly. He's petite bourgeois. He's a small capitalist. He is what Marx and Engels referred to in the Principles of Communism in the Communist Manifesto as a bourgeois socialist. And it's perfectly within his class interests. You know, what we are witnessing right now is the reaffirmation of historical and dialectical materialism. You know, classes are self-interested. They have their own separate class interests, and man's conscience is dictated by his material conditions. And look at Vaush. He is a perfect demonstration of petite bourgeois consciousness. Like, that is why he has these very liberal takes and why he's whining and bitching about a necessary step in the process of the construction of socialism.
Are you suggesting withholding resources from your fellow man makes you any better? Fuck that, your fellow humans are starving. How's that any better? I'm pretty sure the kulaks withheld grain from the Soviet Union. I'm also okay, wait, hold on, really quickly. I'm pretty sure the period of time during which kulaks were engaging in their anti-USSR, anti-collectivization protest was not the same exact time as the Holodomor.
And what's your source for that, Wikipedia? You know, like, a lot of the scholars that write for those Wikipedia articles use, like, fraudulent sources from, like, Cold War and fascist propaganda. Like, I mean, we can get more into the Holodomor in the future. I have works, like, showcasing that a lot of stuff about it is made up. I think a great book that you guys should read is titled Famine, Fascism, and Fraud. Hold on a second. Let me go ahead and look that up. It is by Gareth Jones. Yes, Gareth Jones. The whole Ukrainian genocide myth and how basically it was a narrative that was perpetuated in intelligentsia to basically weaponize the narrative of the famine. It's largely anti-Soviet propaganda, and large swaths of what Vaush is talking about right here is a combination of anti-Soviet propaganda as well as his class interests. Because let's be real here, this is for him to oppose collectivization and the liquidation of the kulaks is very much within his class interests. So, oh yeah, and that's another thing. Glowies edit Wikipedia articles as well, like literal federal agents regularly and routinely edit. And you have Wikipedia articles, referencing Robert Conquest, who was like straight up paid by like British and U.S. intelligence to grift anti-communist propaganda, like straight up. He was on like the British department's payroll to work and make the work that he did, you know?
Yep. So it looks like, unless Wikipedia is actually bourgeois, it looks like the dekulakization policy began in 1929, which means that the kulaks would have already distinguished themselves by protesting against the USSR, whereas the Holodomor began in 1932, meaning that the kulaks were already being persecuted for their protests against the US.
No, absolutely wrong. The drive towards collectivization started in 29, but it was voluntary at first, and you had a sect of the peasantry, the kulaks, that were actively refusing as late as 1931, 1932, and they were protesting all the way up to when the famine started. So absolutely wrong. Also, you haven't disproven that you also haven't disproven the fact that they were hoarding grain and they were like actively sabotaging the regime. Like the kulaks were straight up reactionary, dude. And if you're trying to construct socialism, you have to liquidate the reactionary components that are in the way of that. Like, don't like it? Tough fucking luck. Sorry.
Caesar before the famine took place. How convenient, huh? I bet that would have worked out wonderfully for Stalin. He's trying so hard to get up these protesters, to get them killed, to deport them to Siberia. What do I gotta do? I'll call anyone with more than a few cows kulaks. What do I gotta do? How do I gotta get the peasantry on the side of me brutally oppressing other countries? Famine comes along? Perfect. How convenient. Excellent. Why do tankies have anti-Semitic tendencies? Because Stalin did, and you gotta fucking follow in on what Stalin did. Anything my big boy strongman did.
I have never heard MLs having anti-Semitic tendencies, and also Stalin being an anti-Semite is also a load of utter nonsense. I can get into it at a later date, but yeah, no, he wasn't an anti-Semite, and that's bullshit spread by the likes of Nate Schneider in his propaganda piece, Bloodlands. Yeah, total bullshit. Now you are just straight up quoting fascist propaganda.
It's to be a justification for it. Imperialism was all in the name of the workers. Brutally slaughtering entire swaths of people under the guise of economic redistribution. That economic redistribution never actually happening.
Okay, so I think we can end it there. I don't really feel like going through the last couple minutes because it's largely the same arguments over and over again. Revolution's not a dinner party. I mean, I don't really know what to say. Like, when you are transforming a society from one mode of production to another, you're going to have sects of the population that is within their material class interest who are going to get in the way of that revolutionary transformation. They will oppose you, and you have to liquidate the reactionary elements of society and withstand the reactionary onslaught in order to make the society that you want possible to be a thing. So, I mean, I don't know what else to say besides that. I do have some closing thoughts. Let's go ahead and stop sharing. Okay, guys, okay. So, obviously, he doesn't read books. A lot of the stuff, his knowledge comes from Wikipedia articles and whatever he can, you know, Google Foo or Abstract Ninja his way to, you know? So, there's that. He is pretty anti-intellectual as well. Like, it's very interesting how he'll rail against the right wing for being anti-intellectual, but then, like, he'll actively discourage people from reading books, and he'll just straight up make up shit about Marx and Lenin, like, about things that they said and advocated for that is absolutely not true whatsoever. Acting like it's almost like, as long as you can speak authoritatively on a subject that you know nothing about and you have a large following, people like this can do a lot of damage, and people will believe it. And Vaush is doing damage to our cause, because for one, he's reaffirming a bunch of anti-communist propaganda, and two, I mean, he's actively shitting on us and alienating on us. Well, I would say he does do harm to our cause because he spreads a lot of misinformation and confusion, and he poisons the discourse. But I think he kind of helps us indirectly, because I have a stance that any publicity is good publicity. So, yeah, he's talking shit about us, and he's making up a bunch of bullshit, but the important thing is he's talking about us. He's getting attention fixed on us. And some of those people that watch those debates and watch those videos are going to be like, ooh, who are the tankies? And they're going to come talk to us. And he's making, like, kind of an indirect pipeline into us. So I think in that regard, he is kind of good for us in a way, but you guys have to understand that Vaush is a business owner. He's an entertainer first and an intellectual second. He does this for a living. There's a reason why he doesn't take better positions that are harder to defend, because that would require a lot more self-improvement, and that would require him to be a lot less, that would really cripple his mainstream appeal, because liberal ideology is the culturally hegemonic zeitgeist of the time, so it is much easier to muddy the water with liberal bullshit and make more popular appeal, unfortunately. So I will say this right now, I defend and I uphold the USSR, and I uphold Mao's China and Cuba and all the other socialist regimes, and they should be upheld. But there's a serious problem in the Western left where, I mean, people are just afraid. They're afraid to defend and uphold, you know, regimes that are on their side because of supposed tragedies or wrongdoings or shortcomings that happened. And I really think, like, the left in America needs to learn to absolve them of their mistakes and just uphold them for the historical legacy that they created. I mean, you don't see people in India like the CPI Maoists being like, oh, you know, Stalin was so evil to the Kulaks, I'm not gonna, you know, we're not gonna uphold him now because, you know, this and that happened on his watch, you know. Oh, we're not gonna uphold Mao's China, we're just gonna reject their work. Oh, yeah, no, that wasn't real socialism, but we're going to do it right this time, guys, I promise. The only real socialism's the perfect socialism that exists in my... No, they don't do that fucking bullshit. They uphold the USSR, and they uphold all these other Marxists and leftists. And I'm not saying you have to like them. You know, I'm not saying that at all. You can hate Stalin, you can hate Mao, and you can not like these figures. You know, say what you will, have your criticisms, but you can't honestly say that, like, when you look at the achievements and the things that they've done, when you look at, like, the work of hundreds of millions of people striving to make a world free of exploitation, a world where, you know, everybody has, like, their basic needs met, you can't just fucking discard and shit on that legacy over the mistakes and the shortcomings of it. I don't know, man. It just feels kind of dirty, and it just feels like moralizing, because we don't do this with literally any other historical events. We don't whine and cry or shed crocodile tears for the fucking people that were killed during the French Revolution, the overthrow of the royal family. We don't cry crocodile tears for, like, you know, the people that were killed by, like, Genghis Khan. Like, people have been doing fucked up shit to one another for literally millennia. But the difference is that communist regimes have done it in the pursuit of making the world a genuinely better place for everyone. And the one movement that comes along to do that is the one that gets slammed with all the bullshit, you know? And that's because the powers that be don't want people to be communists, as it turns out. You know what I'm saying? And the last thing I will say about Vaush is that people like him come and go, all right? The Vaushes and the Xander Halls of the world, they'll burn out. These people aren't going to be here 5 years from now. They're not going to be here 10 years from now. But I will be. And the people that watch them, the people that view them, basically, are going to learn over time that their praxis doesn't work, and that the people that really care about social change and making the world a better place, the people that really give a shit about saving the world, they're going to figure out what they need to do and what they need to learn in order to achieve those means. You're not going to, and they're not going to get it from Vaush and Zanderhal. They're going to get it from people like us who actually have centuries of well-developed theory and practice behind us. That's where they're going to get it from. So Vaush and Zanderhal will come and go, but Marxism is here to stay. Marxism is here forever. And when those people do finally get burned out and get tired of them, and they actually do search for the answers and look for the truth, I will be here. We will be here to answer their questions. And with that being said, let's go ahead and finish up. Okay, cool. True, comrade, true. Vaush is a glowy. This is in fact true. Okay, so I will say a couple other things. Little words of encouragement. Don't let this guy get you down. Don't get too distraught. Don't get too distracted. Like I said, this is going to be the last stream that I dedicate to Vaush. I really don't take him seriously anymore. I mean, like me and Socialism for All talked about like what he had to say about theory and how it makes you a lunatic for suggesting people try to improve themselves and read books, and he's saying that while playing a game meant for 5-year-olds. Like he's a fat man child. He'll go the way of the dinosaur. He'll destroy himself in time. What I'm concerned about now is where I'm going to take this channel. I have other videos planned for the future. I want to talk more about like the real history of the Soviet Union and present it in as much of an objective light as I possibly can. I want to talk about Marxist theory and break it down. I want to continue to make these live streams and cover current events because it's good for outreach and, I like interacting with my audience. But yeah, no, I'm going to link a link to my Patreon and the Discord server down below. And if you enjoy my content, do consider donating to my Patreon. Your donations will fuel me because it means I can spend less time at my night job, and more time on my day job, which is this. I'd like this to hopefully become like what I do all the time. I would gladly be your guys' propagandist. Anyways, what country is most likely to have a socialist revolution? That is an excellent question. I mean, we're several decades out for many countries. It's going to be either in Latin America or Southeast Asia. I think India has the greatest potential right now. Could you do videos earlier? I love your streams. Yeah, I'm sorry, but no, India. India is because they have such a massive communist presence. They actually have like a paramilitary wing known as the Naxals. They have millions of members in several communist parties. They dominate different districts. Like out of all the countries, they also have like the most class-conscious base because they're the workshop of the world. There's this insane amount of human rights and like labor abuse that goes on in India. It's ridiculous. And like I remember in January of 2019, there was like a 100 million Indian worker solidarity strike. 100 million people, 150 million. That's like 10% of the population striking. That's insane. And I think as the climate gets hotter, and I think their government is eventually just going to become a failed state and the contradictions are going to intensify. So I think India is going to have its own socialist revolution probably by the 2050s. 2050s, 2060s. I think in the 2020s and the 2030s, Marxism-Leninism and communism in general is going to make a genuine surge and comeback. But there is a strategy that I'd like to discuss, and it's something that I've noticed about the general id and consciousness of people. Like, first we had the skeptic community, the skeptic movement, and then we went from skeptics to no, it was the new atheists. Like anybody who was on YouTube long enough remember the Amazing Atheist or like the early atheist channels. Well, the pipeline from the new atheist channels led to the skeptic community, and the skeptic community branched out into the alt-right and eventually BreadTube. And BreadTube is kind of like the consciousness we're at now. It's still like the liberal, socio-democratic, petite bourgeois reformist consciousness, and it's growing, and it is improving, and there are more and more people that are becoming comrades by the day. But what I'm concerned about is that there's going to be another right-wing, like, pendulum swing, and then I think there's going to be another leftward pendulum swing. The right-wing swing will be in reaction to, like, a Joe Biden presidency and the failures of neoliberalism once again, and then the leftward swing will come in the aftermath of that, and I think in that next leftward swing, we'll be able to get a second wing and grow our channels. So if I manage to grow this channel and gain mass populist appeal and become someone who's actually, like, has influence and has social media presence, you know, unfortunately, it does have to be monetized. I hate to say it, but I do have to turn this into a business model. I don't want to turn it into a business model. I don't want to have to rely on a Patreon to keep me going. But, I mean, I can't just run on my own steam if I really want to make this happen. So that's why the Patreon, I'm going to finish it after I close the stream, and then I'm going to link it in the description below, along with a link to my Discord. And so, like I said, on that swing, we'll be there, and we can take advantage of the algorithm to grow our channels. And because there's a lot of really good socialist channels, they're all very small, and they all have like sub 1,000 subscribers, sub 500 subs. And I'm going to continue to bring on new channels to basically have commentary with them, and I'm going to have like a revolving cast of people that I bring in as I help to like network and bring all these people together and grow these other channels. So that's the part that I want to play, but I need to grow my audience even more for that to happen. So long story short, the algorithm will eventually lead people to communism. It will. We have to learn to take advantage of the tools that we have. The capitalists will sell us the rope that we use to hang him. So that's what I suggest we do. I say we take advantage of the algorithm and hang the capitalist with the rope that he tries to sell us. So, yeah, that's really all I have to say for now. Do you know about EFF in South Africa? No, I'm going to Google them now. Google food time. Are they like a Pan-African movement? Oh, yeah, they're a Pan-African political party. What country are they active in? Oh, they're active in South Africa. Okay, cool. All right, guys. I hope you enjoyed this. I'm going to do one more stream before the end of October, probably next week. Message me in Discord and let me know, like, bring videos to me. Like, bring topics that you'd like me to discuss, and I will do my damnedest to address them with the best analysis that I have. I've got more scripted videos planned for the end of the year. Not that many more because I'm going full-time here pretty soon. I'm going to be working a lot of overtime. But, yeah, like I said, last stream on Vaush. See you guys later. Peace. And thanks for tuning in.